Next speaker is Ashish Sahani. He is a CTO at Idify, and he has more than 25 years of experience in IT for deploying IT systems and working with bank and finance solutions across the globe. And he'll be talking about Idify's in-house grown data and observability platform built on top of open source tools. So over to you. Big round of applause, and please welcome Ash.
I'll use this or sure. You can use this as well. Okay, I'll use this. Hello. Okay. Hi, guys. How are you? Hey. Okay. So I just want a raise of 2 hands from you guys. How many of you, not yet, let me ask the question first.
You didn't qualify this thing.
It's okay. Thanks for doing that. So how many of you are enthusiasts who like to get up 5:30 in the AM and like to go cycling for 50 kilometers? Now, do you want to raise your hands? No? Anybody? Come on, guys. Some of you out there don't like. Yeah. Okay, let's do it 40. No? Okay. So let's just think about it. Just imagine for a moment that you are one of them. Okay? No harm in doing that, right? And you're cycling like 50 kilometers every day, 6 days of a week. 1 day rest is okay. And we want to measure your performance. Yeah? And the way to measure the performance could be in 2 ways. One way is we just want to know the cyclist is actually cycling, and he's traveling at a certain speed and in a particular direction. And the second thing with regard to that is that he has not crashed. Yeah? So that's one form. And let's call that monitoring. Okay? And the other is of doing that is we want to know what is the cadence at which he's cycling, right? What is the power at which he's applying the power on the cycle? What's the weight of that cyclist? What's the height of that cyclist? Which terrain is he going on? Is it has a gradient or not a gradient? And so on and so forth. Okay? And if you wanted to measure at that level, we'll call it instrumentation. Okay? So keep that thought with you. Now all of you are that cyclist for this journey. Okay? For this journey, we are going to spend some time out here and just try to manifest how you will really try to measure and collect all this data, what instruments will you need in order to do on the cycle, and so on and so forth. Okay? So to just get going and set another context, my name is missing. I don't know whoever prepared the slide did not put in it. So I've spent about 3 decades in this industry. Name's Ashish. And why I'm setting this context is because your history tells you why you're doing something in life. Yeah? So my journey started with setting up the first automated trading exchange in this country at National Stock Exchange. I don't know, how many of you trade here? Yeah, good. Hopefully you're making some money and trading in that. So in that respect, just think about it. We were setting up a stock exchange, running over satellites. Brokers are the most nastiest users you can get out there. I can bet to you it's all money involved out there, right? And you have trade happening. You can have market problems which can just spike the whole thing. And we wanted to benchmark how this system can sustain or not sustain. That's one example. Then I had an experience building a healthcare network information system for all the hospitals in Singapore, right? Fast forward a little bit, because it would take otherwise the whole time for me to narrate that. And then I was building a BI product myself out there, right? Then I happened to become a CTO of a Barclays Bank, and I ended up being a CTO at Idify, right? So keep that as a context in order to understand what we're going to talk about here in this sense, right? So in order to understand what is data fabric, I just don't want to talk from a point of view of just what is data fabric. I have to set you the context, because you could build this data fabric, and we'll talk about it in different contexts. So if you can both raise both your hands, if you know anything about Idify. Some people from Idify know about Idify. Okay, how many of you know about instrumentation-based development methodology? Again, raise your hands if you know about it. No hands. Okay. How many of you have heard of the term data fabric and understand what data fabric is? Okay, so very few, right? So this is important because if I'm doing a talk, I need to understand what the audience is coming from, right? So let's understand what ID5 is first, right? Out there, everything is right now, talk is about digital economy. Digital transformation. Don't look at the slide, look at me. So it's about digital transformation, it's about digital economy. And what you're building is actually digital applications or digital products, right? We happen to be in the space of risk and fraud. We like to catch fraudsters in the business, which are plenty of them, right? And we want to, what we call, unlock the real, which is we want employees to get their jobs. We want merchants to get onboarded. We want people who want genuine loans to be able to take those loans, right? And in that respect, we have, and if you look at it, the kind of frauds that are happening are evolving. It's not like we are tracking a problem which is 10 years long. Fraud is changing all the time, right? And that's why we have been, our journey started about 10 years back. And it started within the risk and fraud space in background verification. If you try to imagine you guys going with your employers, trying to give those documents, used to be a very archaic process of getting documents and doing that. So we built a platform around that, how you could engineer that. Forward did that, machine learning hype started, so we have ID cards. The whole idea is, what we call in the industry is, in order to do that, there is identity proofing needs to happen. That happens through your, what we call document proofing, it happens through your data proofing, it happens through your behavior proofing, and so on and so forth. So we created a whole API business, which actually uses in the background your machine learnings to do OCR and all of that in order to launch what is called the API platform, through which you can do liveness check, you can retrieve the document, you can know whether it's a tampered document, and so on and so forth. Then 3 years back, when there was no so-called pandemic was sort of kicking in, RBI came up with an approach that how someone sitting anywhere in this country could do a KYC so that you can open a bank account. Just imagine if you don't have a bank account, today it doesn't work, right? You need to have, for even the rural population that needs to do that. So we were the first to launch a video KYC platform through our, what is called a video services platform, right? By the way, it used WebRTC in that sense to do the video communication, right? So we went as well into the in-depth. Just since it was a talk, we do a WebRTC communication at 100 kbps and below in order to do that communication, which happens between an agent and a customer through a process. Now you got to understand, it's not just like a video call we have set up. It's a process where we capture documents. We take selfie of the image. We run our APIs to check whether the document that you have captured and the selfie of the person matches there in real time. So there's a whole lot of process. Think from networks they are coming in. Think of the devices they are coming in, the browsers they are using it, and so on and so forth, right? And so what you're seeing on this left and right now are the products that we have built. Using a framework that uses what today is probably all of you might be familiar with, are the kind of things. So we are a SaaS player, so we built our architecture around cloud architecture. Now when we say cloud architecture, there can be many definitions out here. What I want you to get is that the platform or the product is made up of capabilities, because this is going to be very important. And these capabilities are then broken down into what we call services, right? And these services are going to emit certain instrumentation events, okay, from that perspective. So, and we have made these all API-based and so on. We use functional programming. How many of you, again, raise your hands, use Elixir? Any of you heard? You use? That's great. So Elixir is one of the functional programming languages used in telecom industry a lot. That's how your telecom base and all systems use. We use that for building mission-critical systems, right? AI and ML, I don't need to introduce. Everybody thinks they know AI ML, right? At least that's what it is. But when it comes to fundamentally understanding how to take some intelligence out of data, they say, model kaun sa lagana hai? Arey, model se pehle samjhe to sahi, value kya propose hai? So there is that side. And then the whole idea is if we are in the cloud, we are a SaaS players, we work both in a multi-tenant and a single-tenant environment. Okay? And in order to do that, and the scale at which we operate, just to give you an idea, is we do 1 million API hits per day in our that, and growing at 10x, right? At that kind of a speed. We do video communications, which is video KYC profiles of over 100,000 profiles a day, right? And we want to be able to release daily or weekly. Today we do weekly, we do it even 2 times, we can do it daily if you want. So that is what, otherwise you don't understand what DevOps means in this whole perspective, right? It's the whole idea of I want the DevOps to be very clearly understood is the ability to take your idea to the market at the fastest speed possible, most reliably. So that's the core nature and context that I wanted to set with you before I deep dive into Data Fabric. Yeah? So let's now talk about the topic itself, which is Data Fabric, having set this context. Now remember, so I told you and asked you these 3 questions. Have you heard of those terms? Either you didn't want to say yes, but let's try to define that. So the way we want to be able to do is those, if you remember what we do, which is build the products, you got to understand when you do businesses out there, it's not just that you go and sign a contract and the business just happens or the business just comes. You go and sign up with a client what is called SLOs, service level objectives, right? And these SLOs are very critical in your whole business that drives. That's how you make money at the end of the day. And the reason that is because SLOs tells you whether you're performing according to the business performance that is required there, which you're signing up for across our products that you saw. Now, if you have that understanding of SLOs, try to understand what is the way that I'm going to meet them. They're typically formed in SLIs, which is service level indicators. That's the business context of it. Now try to forward and say, now how am I going to do this? Right? And there comes the point of, which we use called the word Data Fabric, which is basically not a product, it's an architecture. It's an approach of taking data. This bottle keeps falling off. So it's an architecture approach, yeah, of how we're going to get those data that I told you about, the services that are going to be emitting, to bring them together, right? Now, I told you about that cyclist where we were just monitoring versus that instrumenting. Now what we want is, and I told you about instrumentation-based development, that fundamental is, in our case, what is an instrument defined as, or an event of an instrument defined as? I told you our products are made up of service category and services. So it is made up of every event must emit from where is the source, which is which service category and which service it is doing, what kind of events that is generating, and then with respect to that event, what are we measuring, right? And we cannot deploy that service until that is there. Now, whenever I talk about that, people talk about logging and all of that. This is not logging. This is about truly instrumenting so that you can real-time analyze things and process and know exactly is it performing or not performing according to the objectives that we have set, right? So it is critical for us to have that perspective when we are doing that, right? So that's instrumentation-based development, right? My team is here. If they release something without instrumentation in a services, they have 2 choices. Either leave the organization or do it the way it is, right? Otherwise, it's not going to work out. And we have actually done that. So now, the third process which is there about Data Fabric is if every service is taking and emitting out this, you need to bring this data together. But by the way, do you know, now you'll say, I think the question that is, if isn't all these services, applications deployed in this world, which at least are critical in nature, doing that? Now that is the interesting point. I told you about my history, about what I was trying to tell you. And I should never get a requirement to say, what all should I measure in order to make it successful? It was supposed to work. That's it. I built the biggest for the capital market, re-engineered the complete, and there was no requirement about that, right? So much over that. Now, take the contra view of this. I'm assuming all of you have taken flights out here from the Santa Cruz airport or somewhere. Do you know of any aircraft taking off without a black box, which records your voice and flight data? Then how are you deploying something in production without not having that instrumentation out there? But I can guarantee you, most of the people even don't think at design what they need to see how the success is and measure that, right? And they are still launching systems into production. And that causes huge problems and money loss if you really look at it. What really happens then is your application starts to fall. Remember, as your organization grows, your budget is there, but most of the budget is sunk in, rather than new development, in fixing things. That's the nature of the business. The biggest insurance company, you take it. I told you I was a CTO at a bank. You know what was the one project before I left was about how to build a good bank. Can you imagine that? That was the approach. And what was a good bank about? It was about keeping your systems at that level of performance and evergreen. You had to do this kind of a massive opportunity in that. So what we are trying to do, if you look at this whole approach, is we are trying to define, it's a pretty comprehensive thing to think about, but just at the high level, the capabilities that we are talking about at a very nutshell, right? So this is all about trying to understand, just don't think about reporting as I have to send an MIS report. Think about how in the process do I get success in that. So we will take an example later on and go through this process. Then you want to be, so now if you look at this, when the services are emitting, just think about what happens to that event, the instrumentation that happens. It needs to be ingested. It needs to be harvested. This word may not be that doing. Harvesting means it's no point just putting a seed there if you don't know what it's growing to or how it's going to be nurtured and all that, right? You need to manage that. People need to be able to discover it easily, right? People need to be able to figure out then what are the actions that I need to do. Those actions could be as simple as alerts, or it could be doing that. So what we want to be able to do it, how quickly can you write, or in the easiest way, plug in all the services events into this whole system. And we have a very simple, what we call the minimum viable instrumentation that must happen. Minimum for every service and every feature. 3 things. It must tell us the usage so that we know how much usage is happening. We need to know the performance, which we call TAT, turnaround time, and if there is any exceptions that have happened with context, so that we can build a trace around the whole thing in every request, right? And then if you look at third one, I will talk about a little bit more, is the insight service that we have built, because the whole objective of the data fabric is to provide insights, both for ourselves. We are a product company, right? How are we going to improve our products, or where are we going to put our money? Because remember, money is finite, not infinite, right? So if it's finite, where should I put the money? That's your question. So 2 minutes left. I have one more slide. So where am I going to put the money? And that depends on that. And then active alerting. That means I need to know who should be alerted, when should be alerted. Too much noise alerts, fails. Nobody looks at the alert. वो शेर वाला है ना, शेर आया, शेर आया. शेर आया नहीं, जब आया तो आप सो रहे थे, हैं? और दूसरा है anomaly detection. How will you going to do it? You need to figure out in the whole sequence, every day does not the same day. ये सोच है हमारी. हर दिन कुछ ना कुछ अलग होता है. हैं? है कि नहीं? Okay. So last one to cover. This is a pretty detailed slide. Some of our folks are there if you want to discuss it. But I don't know whether it's very clear or not for the pulpit. That's the generating layer. This is the processing layer. And this is the visualization. And all those green boxes that you're seeing, we're utilizing open source software. And our intention is for the data fabric, which is the layer on top of it, which we have built, we hope to open source that itself. Right? So if you look at it from the lab, we are using Logstash, Apache Beam as some of the technologies in order to do both streaming and for analyzing. we're using on this side, remember, one of the most fundamental when you think about data, they will always think about not real time and not think about, but any business data can be converted into time series. And then you can actually plot and see how time series analysis can happen. And the last, which is the most important thing, act on that architecture. Now, what the data fabric does is it brings this out together around this by what we wrote custom over this for all our business products that makes it a data fabric, right? And we collect in real time all of this data, such that for our video platform, ingesting that, we build a product for our product. We call it Live Support Desk, where we are actually monitoring how every call is happening. Because remember, I told you about SLO, and I'll finish with this. The thing that we are tracking, and this is where the game starts from, not from machine learning, not from anywhere, is what is the conversion rate of all the folks that are coming for the video services platform. And that conversion rate, in order to tell me that whether I'm doing or not, requires us to analyze all the data behind it to see how the journey is happening, where the drop-offs are happening, why did the call drop off, was it for the business reasons or technical reasons, and so on and so forth, right? So our approach of data fabric has been to take all our digital products, make them into an instrumentation-based development modeling, ingest all of that into this data fabric layer, and then act at real time doing the processing on that, using completely open source products. There's no proprietary product in that. Whatever we have built, we want to open source it too. But it needs to be packaged in a way which the open community can then be able to accept in that. Yeah? So this is what, in this time frame, I could share with you guys. Hopefully it made some sense. So think about that cyclist and all that instrumentation data flowing through this data fabric, and now I'm being able to measure one parameter called FTP, which is the throughput of a cyclist of the same kind of users who are able to generate the same power or not in the same terrain and everything and figuring out. Yeah? Hopefully it was good. I don't know if we have time for questions. If not, thank you so much. And I hope it was some way valuable for you. Yeah? Thank you.